Alright, what's up? I'm Jack. Welcome back to the LFC Transfer Room. Today's video is an opposition preview ahead of Liverpool's match against Brighton at Anfield on Saturday. Joining us today is Andy Naylor of The Athletic to give us a better insight into what to expect from Graham Potter's side. We'll have some team news as well as some predicted lineups from the two teams. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get into things. So heading into Saturday's encounter, Brighton find themselves in 5th place in the Premier League. Flashback, more or less 12 months ago, they found themselves in 16th place after 9 matches, a record of 2, 3, and 4. They've inverted that this year for a record of 4, 3, and 2. Now they've had a strong start to the campaign with 4 wins and a loss inside their first 5 in their last 4 in the Premier League, as well as getting knocked out of the FA Cup, or excuse me, the Carabao Cup by Leicester City. They have 3 losses and a draw, or 3 draws and a loss, I should say. So they're really in an interesting spot, Brighton are. In terms of what Andy said about them, he thinks that the overall performances have been quite good. There hasn't been a drop-off in the quality this season. It's more so been a case of riding their luck versus not riding their luck. So how will Brighton look to line up against Liverpool under Graham Potter?
Extremely fluid. We've become accustomed under Graham Potter to not knowing what team he's going to pick, and then to see players popping up in all sorts of different positions within the game, during the game. The formation quite often, depending on how the match is panning out, changes. I mean, the Man City game, I'll give you one example. Solly March, who sort of came back into the team. Now, Solly March, before Graham came, was primarily a left winger under former manager Chris Hughton. Graham converted him last season into a left wing back in his system. He actually played very well in the win at Anfield and picked up an injury, cartilage injury, which ruled him out for the rest of last season. He's come back in. He came back in at Man City, started off on the right, sort of right wing back really. Moved a bit more into the middle for the second half, and as the game progressed, he became a kind of fluid striker with Leandro Trossard. So they weren't really playing with a 9 at that stage. They were playing with 2 forwards, if you like, trying to get into the pockets. So that's just one example. That's one player whose role within that game changed about 3 times.
Returning to Anfield will be Adam Lallana, who's kind of had a resurgence and change in his role since departing Liverpool. Andy gives his insight into what to expect from Adam Lallana when he comes back to Anfield.
Adam has been a really kind of key player for Brighton since he signed, both on and off the pitch. I think the interesting change, if you like, this season is last season, and he talked when he first came to Brighton about primarily sort of playing as that kind of 8 or 10, quite advanced midfielder. And that's where most of the time he played last season. He did play sometimes in a holding role, but not very much. What's happened this season is he's more or less exclusively played in a holding role to start with, alongside Yves Bissouma, and even since Bissouma's been out of the side with a knee injury, he's still been playing in that deeper role alongside Pascal Gross. And it was interesting that Pep Guardiola, after the game against Man City, drew attention to that and said how that actually causes a problem for opponents because of the type of player Lallana is. You know, he's not necessarily what you'd expect of a player playing in that role. Obviously, we know about his quality on the ball. He can go left, he can go right. So as a kind of building block for their play, that's quite an interesting change. What he hasn't got, of course, in that role, perhaps, and is perhaps where it's sometimes lacking for Brighton, he hasn't really got that physicality.
Another aspect of the midfield that is actually up in the air is Yves Bissouma. There are multiple issues regarding potential selection for him, but should he play, should he not play? There definitely is a big aspect that he brings to Brighton's midfield.
Probably the game in which it was most noticeable was against Crystal Palace, which was the first game Bissouma missed, having picked up an injury against Leicester. And they really did miss his kind of combativeness in that role. that evening. You know, he's very good at kind of anticipating situations and regaining possession, and then getting the move. I mean, he's a talented player on the ball himself. I would say not quite as talented in that particular sense as Lallana, but nevertheless very good as well. But it's really that kind of ability in stopping the opponents in that area, you know, in and around his own box that Brighton have missed, I think.
The threat from Liverpool against Brighton is very simple, at least the biggest threat, and it's just 2 words.
I only need 2 words, don't I? Mo Salah. And, you know, I think planning for how you stop him is very difficult. Nobody's come up with the answer so far, have they, this season? And but to be fair, of course, Brighton will be aware of the threat he poses. But there are threats all over the pitch, really, to Brighton going to Anfield.
It's a daunting task in the eyes of Andy for Brighton, and it's a pretty big thing that they have to do right if they want to get 3 points.
Everything. I think, you know, pretty much everything. They're going to need near perfection, I think, to come out with a result against this Liverpool team in this form at a packed Anfield. I think Brighton are going to have to be pretty much spot on in everything they do, and even then probably hope that Liverpool are not quite at their absolute peak to be able to get a result.
All right, that was some great insight from Andy into the overall happenings of Brighton. You can find some of his work in the description down below. Make sure to follow him on Twitter and go check out his work at The Athletic. So the way the Brighton lineup is going to be likely 3 at the back with wing backs. Liverpool, it's very interesting. It's a back and forth on how they fare against this kind of formation. Interesting if they play a front 3 versus if they kind of have Adam Lallana in more of a deep lying role in the midfield, the center of the midfield. You'd imagine they want to pack the midfield a bit, especially, you know, with Liverpool, the biggest issues for them is no Fabinho, still out with the injury. Thiago back in training after the calf injury, but he's not going to be ready for the match. Naby Keita, surprisingly, stunningly to me, is actually going to be available for the match, according to Jurgen Klopp in his statements made today on Friday. So really, it is a fascinating development in that sense that they're able to get him potentially in the midfield, really important contributor if possible. I imagine that Firmino will be the likely forward to keep his place after a tremendous showing against Manchester United last time out in the Premier League. And so I think a big potential sticking point, potential change that Liverpool could make is who you play potentially in the center of defense, trying to find a number 5. I don't believe I actually have a number 5 tile. Maybe you see Ibrahima Konate in place of Joel Matty, who played in the Carabao Cup victory in the midweek against Preston. The front 3 of Mopé and Trossard, or front 2 I should say, could potentially pose some problems, especially with Jimmy Milner likely to be the man who holds down the defensive midfield role. Him and Henderson will probably rotate in that position. It was kind of a defensive midfielder by committee against Manchester United in the place and the lack of absence of Fabinho due to his injury. I think that Liverpool definitely are the favourites at Anfield, especially with Dangerman Mo Salah up against Marc Cucurella in that left wing back spot. That's going to be the probably most dangerous spot for Liverpool to attack down. But it remains to be seen. You know, they have some good protection in the midfield. If Bissouma plays, there's some physicality that maybe is not matched by Liverpool. I think you would probably want to see Milner a bit more advanced. He's a bit old, but he's definitely not lacking physicality. Mane didn't play against Manchester United until much later on in the match. I think he might return to the lineup, but Jota might maintain his place. I'm very interested in what the front 3 looks like because Liverpool, you know, they're beginning to showcase a bit of depth. Origi with a bit of acrobatics. I don't know if that's the right term to describe it against Preston, but they have got some good contributors up and down the squad. So it is going to be interesting how Liverpool decide to line up at Anfield on Saturday. So that's your insight from Andy Naylor. That's what you could expect team news-wise. This is how the formations will line up between the 2 teams. How confident are you heading into the match at Anfield on Saturday? I'll be doing the live watch along here on the LC Transfer, so make sure to subscribe, get involved. It'll be a nice atmosphere. Have the game on, have me on as well. Just have a nice chat, someone to watch the game with. I always appreciate it. to have someone else to watch the game with. So why don't you join me on the LFC Transfer? Make sure to subscribe, turn on our notifications so you don't miss anything, and follow us on all our socials at LFC Transfer Room. I've been Jack for the LFC Transfer Room. Enjoy the rest of your day.